They said she was a queen without an heir, a sovereign whose body carried only jewels, not children. But behind the curtains of her chambers, she carried a secret no one could know. Her belly swelled under heavy gowns. Her face grew pale, yet the court whispered of nothing. She hid it well, too well, because in her world, an heir born in silence was safer than one born in light. The palace halls echoed with plots, daggers, and betrayals. If they found out she was with child, they would kill it before its first breath. So she prepared something no mother should ever prepare. Not a cradle in the nursery, a cradle in the grave. When her tomb was carved in stone, her order was clear. Build a hollow, deep within, shaped like a crib. There she would place the child she carried, so its soul would sleep untainted, away from the knives of men. Centuries later, when the tomb was opened, the world discovered what her people never knew. The queen had been pregnant, and with her in death lay the trace of a child who had never lived. But why? Why protect a soul in stone instead of flesh? And what secret was she hiding that demanded such a terrible choice? They called her queen, yet she lived like a prisoner in her own palace. Every corridor whispered. Every servant's bow carried suspicion. In a court where ambition killed faster than poison, her womb had become the most dangerous secret in the kingdom. She knew what awaited a child born without the approval of the council. Assassins were not only hired for kings, they were bought for babies too. And in the chronicles of her realm, every rival who threatened the balance of succession was erased before the ink of birth could dry. So she played her part. She feigned illness when her body grew heavy. She wrapped herself in gowns layered thick, hiding curves the court dared not question. She sat in council, her hands steady upon the throne, while beneath the table, her other hand trembled against her stomach. The child kicked in silence, unseen, unacknowledged, and unwanted, at least by those who surrounded her. Why such fear? Because this child was no ordinary heir. Whispers claimed the father was not the king, but another. A union sealed in shadow, born of passion or strategy, no one knew. What was certain was this: if the truth emerged, it would ignite a war of bloodlines. The nobles would call the child illegitimate. The priests would call it cursed. And her enemies, they would not wait for judgment. The queen had watched others fall. She remembered the infant prince drowned in the bath, declared an accident, but known to be murder. She recalled the princess strangled by her own nurse before the candlelight reached dawn. She had seen coffins no larger than bread loaves carried to unmarked graves while courtiers smiled. She had buried her tears in silence. She would not allow her child to be added to that list. So she devised her plan in secrecy. She summoned masons to her burial chamber under the guise of expanding its grandeur. They carved arches, pillars, and walls. But at her command, one recess was made different. Not for relics, not for jewels. A hollow shaped unmistakably like a crib. A place no historian could mistake for decoration. A cradle of stone where no assassin could reach. Imagine her resolve. To prepare a grave for a child before preparing its nursery. To trade a heartbeat for the safety of a soul. She spoke no word of it, but every movement revealed her desperation. She touched the walls of the crypt as though they were flesh. She lingered by the empty recess, whispering to it as though the child were already there. And yet some in the court suspected. A handmaiden noticed the queen's sudden refusals of wine. A physician, sworn to secrecy, was summoned more often than usual. A priest, bribed to bless the tomb early, remarked too loudly on its peculiar design. Rumors trickled through the palace like water seeping through cracks in stone. But the queen was relentless. She dismissed servants before questions grew sharp. She threatened masons with blinding if they spoke of what they had carved. She even silenced the priest. Some say his tongue was cut out, others that he vanished into the river. Whatever the truth, no one dared ask again. Still, every lie she told tightened the noose around her. A queen who hides carries not only a child, but a burden that could crush an empire. She knew it. She accepted it. For her, the risk was worth it. But the darkest question remains. Did she plan to bring the child into the world at all? Or was the tomb meant not just as protection, but as its only destiny? The queen's chambers became a theater of silence. Curtains drawn, guards dismissed. Even the clatter of servants' footsteps was reduced to whispers. Her body swelled, but the palace pretended blindness. No midwife was summoned in public. No royal decree announced a coming heir. It was as though the entire kingdom conspired with her secret, though most of them had no idea. Her heart carried the dual rhythm of fear and life. Each time the child stirred, she pressed her hands against her stomach, afraid the soundless walls might betray her. She spent hours alone, writing letters she would never send, sealing them in wax and hiding them within the tomb. Letters meant for a child who might never read them. "You are safer in stone than in blood," one note allegedly said. Centuries later, fragments of parchment would be discovered near the carved crib. Ink faded, but unmistakably maternal. But secrecy carried its own poison. The queen's health began to decline. Isolated, denied the counsel of physicians who might speak too freely, she relied on hushed visits from a loyal handmaiden and a single trusted healer. Rumors say this healer was sworn to silence with golden threats, but even his skill could not protect her from the toll of concealment. Her face grew hollow, her steps slow, yet still she walked the palace halls as if nothing was amiss. The healer's conscience warred against his duty. Each time he placed his hand upon her swollen belly, he knew both mother and child were trapped between life and death. He begged her to reveal the truth, but she silenced him with eyes of iron. "If you speak," she whispered, "their blades will cut faster than your herbs can heal." Her enemies, however, were never blind. In every court, rival factions wait like vultures circling the dying. They noticed her pallor. They noticed her refusals of ceremony. They asked questions laced with venom. "Has our queen grown too weak to rule? Does she carry a disease unfit for a throne?" None dared voice the truest suspicion, for speaking it without proof was treason. But the tension thickened. The palace knew something was coming. No one knew what. And then the whispers of bloodlines returned. If the child's father was not the king, if its heritage bore scandal, then the queen's silence was not only fear, it was strategy. To reveal the child would fracture the crown. To hide it was to preserve the illusion of stability. And so her womb became both weapon and curse. She carried within her the potential to end dynasties or to prolong them, and she knew it. The tomb, meanwhile, took shape. By torchlight, masons carved the recess deeper, smoothing its edges, lining its floor. They labored under strict orders, working in secrecy. Some claimed to hear the queen's voice echo in the chamber as she oversaw their work, whispering lullabies that were never sung in the nursery. To the workers, it felt less like a monument to the dead and more like a cradle for the unborn. A strange unease followed them out of the crypt, as though the stone had absorbed the weight of a mother's fear. As her pregnancy neared its end, the palace itself seemed to pulse with tension. She vanished for days at a time, retreating into hidden quarters. Servants spoke of muffled cries at night, of bloodied linens burned in secret, of the faint sound of a baby's whimper silenced too quickly. But no proclamation was ever made. No infant was ever presented to the court. The throne remained airless, while whispers grew darker. Was the child stillborn or deliberately taken? Did the queen herself place it in the tomb before life could fully begin? The chronicles do not agree. Some claim the child was born alive but hidden, taken immediately to the crypt, and sealed away. Others insist the queen never allowed it to draw a breath, that she chose death over betrayal. And yet when the tomb was opened centuries later, the evidence was clear. A recess shaped like a crib, traces of organic remains, and fragments of cloth too small for an adult. Proof that the queen's womb and grave had become one. The court at the time saw only a woman who weakened and then died too young. They buried her with ceremony, draped her in jewels, sealed the stone doors shut. They never spoke of what they feared, for silence preserved stability. But behind the sealed walls, the truth lingered, hidden in the shadow of her choice. And so the queen's story became legend. Not of a ruler who lost her child, but of a mother who buried hers alive in stone, believing that death was safer than life. Whether that child ever breathed, history cannot say, but the carved cradle remains, a mother's defiance, a mother's betrayal of nature itself. At midnight, and ordered a private sorrow ceremony, code for no witnesses. Her body would be prepared before dawn, placed in the tomb by noon, the door sealed before dusk. Tradition invites questions, secrecy buries them. Her most loyal handmaiden, the healer, and 2 chamberlains washed the body. The shroud hid what their eyes could not: a slackened abdomen, burnt linens from the previous night, the healer's tremor as he checked the pulse that was no longer there. No one spoke the thoughts circling the room. The order was clear: prepare, process, seal. 12 soldiers carried the bier through shuttered corridors. At the crypt, the captain presented a writ. Only the appointed may enter. All others wait outside. The masons who had carved the chamber stood ready, tools wrapped in cloth to muffle sound. Even the clink of iron against stone felt dangerous, as if noise itself might speak what they were sworn to hide. Torchlight revealed what few had seen: the recess the queen had demanded. A cradle carved from the wall, smooth, deliberate, unmistakable. The handmaiden's breath hitched. The chamberlains turned their faces away. The healer stepped to the edge and stared as if expecting warmth to rise from the hollow. It was cold as law. Oils were poured, titles read, a circlet placed. Then came a decree from the counselor: no object, living or dead, shall remain in this crypt beyond the sovereign, her regalia, and the emblems of her reign. The sentence had teeth. Everyone heard the target. Everyone looked at the cradle and pretended they had not. When the last prayer ended, the handmaiden moved out of line. From her sleeve, she drew a folded square of soft cloth the size of a swaddling. She laid it inside the stone recess. The captain seized her wrist, called it contraband. The counselor hesitated, then allowed the cloth as a token of mercy. The captain released her, but his glance promised consequences. By afternoon, the door was sealed, seams soldered, iron bars locked, mortar stamped with the mason master's signet. The queen who left no heir was now the only name the crypt would confess. Power abhors a vacuum. Within a week, 3 factions gnawed at the crown. One demanded a pliant cousin, another claimed regency until the rightful heir emerges, bait for rumor. A third whispered that the queen had died with child, and that proof existed beyond the palace. Evidence was not required. Fear balanced the ledger. People who had seen nothing swore they had heard everything. Then the vanishings began. The healer's clinic was found ransacked, ledgers burned, beds still warm. Some said he fled. Others said the river took him. The handmaiden was accused of theft, then treason, then nothing at all. Silence became her only charge. She disappeared the week a new royal seal was minted. The council called it renewal. Servants called it erasure. Decades turned the story into warning. Parents told children to obey lest the stone cradle claim them. Chroniclers polished the past until it gleamed. Thrones changed hands with banners and speeches, loud public rituals to mask a quiet private crime. The tomb remained closed, iron and law reinforcing each other like ribs around a secret. Centuries shifted. The palace became a museum, then a relic. Scholars replaced courtiers. Funding replaced tribute. A team petitioned to restore the necropolis. Paperwork multiplied until the past seemed bureaucratic. Finally, gates opened. Lamps descended. The door that had not moved since the day of sealing groaned like an old verdict. They found the queen as inventories promised. Crown, scepter, rings. But the recess silenced the room. The cradle's stone gleamed under dust. Inside lay fragments, organic flecks, threads of fine cloth, a tiny bronze charm shaped like an open eye, no intact bones. Time had fed on what was tender first. Yet laboratories later read what politics had buried. Traces consistent with neonatal tissue, a botanical residue from herbs known historically to still a womb. We cannot prove murder, the report concluded. We can only prove presence. The discovery detonated beyond the crypt. Scholars argued over ethics, theology, succession law. Faith leaders called the queen either martyr or monster. Documentaries edited her into a saint, a strategist, a fanatic, a mother. The state erected glass and velvet around the site. Visitors queued and left quiet, as if noise were disrespect. Some laid flowers. Others left notes addressed to the unnamed. You were seen. More surfaced. A monastery ledger listed payments to stoneworkers for the queen's under-altar. A noblewoman's private letter envied a sovereign who dared place eternity above law. In a dissolved guild's archives, the mason master's oath appeared. Blindness promised for apprentices who spoke of the hollow. Fear fossilized in ink. During a second survey, a side corridor collapsed, exposing a walled-up passage. In the dust lay a skeleton shackled at the ankles, wrists fused to iron. A physician's ring clung to one finger, set with a tiny serpent. The report named no names, only a profession. The healer had not run. He had been fed to the stone. After that, the narrative lost its last layer of innocence. Silence had been enforced, not merely chosen. Standing before cameras, the lead scholar said a line that survived every edit. This is not a murder scene or a miracle. This is a decision. The sentence enraged half the nation and pacified none of it. What looks like clarity to one century is cruelty to the next. Yet the word decision lodged like a shard. Someone chose a cradle of rock over a cradle of wood. Someone chose witnesses of stone over witnesses of breath. Someone paid others to vanish so the choice could remain pure. The ministry debated resealing the chamber. It remained open. The plaque outside offers no verdict, only facts that endure scrutiny. A queen, a sealed room, a recess carved to fit an infant. Residues that speak of life measured in breaths or days. Disappearances that trace a circle around a secret. School groups pass through. Children ask why a cradle would be made of stone. Parents answer poorly. Guides repeat the script, then pause at the same line every time. The one about the cloth the handmaiden left. What happened to that cloth? It did not survive whole. But under microscope light, fibers recovered from the recess matched a weave used only for royal swaddling. Meaning nothing, some say. Textiles travel. Meaning everything, others argue. A ritual completed in absence. The doubt is the point. Doubt preserves power. Doubt multiplies pilgrimages. Tourists photograph the cradle and capture nothing the sensor can explain. The proportion too perfect for accident, the polish earned by centuries of lightless waiting, the way the hollow seems full when empty. Walls do not confess. They hold, they remember, they wait. The queen still reigns there, a sovereign over a kingdom of silence. And beside her, the stone cradle holds the same question every scholar dodges and every parent understands. When a mother cannot protect a body, may she protect a soul? And what debt does the living world pay for that protection? The Queen's story, preserved in stone and rumor, quickly became more than a tale of secrecy. It became a question of succession, a phantom heir hovering over centuries of politics. Every dynasty that followed wrestled with the shadow of the unborn, unseen child. In the decades after her death, whispers continued. The Queen had left behind a living heir hidden by loyalists. Peasant songs hinted at a child of stone who would return in disguise. Pretenders rose, some claiming royal blood, others simply wielding the rumor like a weapon. Civil wars brewed, not because evidence existed, but because doubt was a currency more valuable than coin. If the Queen's bloodline had not ended, then every crown that followed was built on sand. The council did everything to erase such doubts. Records were destroyed, genealogies altered. The royal chronicle for the Queen's reign skips entire months, as though by deleting time itself, they could delete what had lived inside her. But erasure leaves a scar sharper than truth. The very act of silence gave the story oxygen. Priests entered the struggle too. Some declared the Queen damned, her womb a vessel of sin. Others insisted she had sacrificed her child to save its soul from corruption, turning her into a near saint. Pilgrims visited the palace ruins in secret, praying not to the crown or throne, but to the hollow crib. They left offerings, ribbons, carved toys, milk poured onto stone floors. Rituals emerged. Mothers with stillborn infants traveled miles to whisper their grief into cracks of the crypt wall, believing the Queen would guard their children's souls. Over time, she was not just a monarch, but a figure of folk devotion, half cursed, half holy. Politics, however, remained merciless. Centuries later, rival houses resurrected the claim of the hidden heir to delegitimize reigning monarchs. Pamphlets circulated, depicting the stone cradle as proof of conspiracy. Each rebellion, each coup, carried her ghost within it. The child that never lived in daylight lived endlessly in propaganda. The womb and grave had become a weapon wielded across generations. One warlord even paraded a newborn in public, claiming it had been kept safe in stone since the Queen's reign. People believed, for belief was always stronger than proof. Archaeologists who uncovered the tomb in modern times confronted not only fragments of cloth and trace remains, but also a battlefield of interpretations. Some hailed it as vindication of the Queen's maternal love, proof she tried to protect. Others condemned it as infanticide preserved in stone. Each side found in the cradle what they wished to see. The child was weapon, relic, symbol, saint, sin, never simply human. Yet the most haunting truth lay not in politics or faith, but in biology. Scientists concluded that even if the infant had survived birth, its chances were slim. Malnutrition, infection, and secrecy would likely have doomed it within days. The Queen may have known this. Perhaps her act was mercy disguised as betrayal. Perhaps the tomb was not just prison, but sanctuary from a harsher fate. Still, the image endures. A monarch who ruled with silence, who prepared a cradle of stone instead of wood, who believed eternity could hold what life could not. The heir that never was did not vanish with time. It continues to breathe questions into every corridor of history it touches. Who truly inherits a kingdom built on secrets? What becomes of a crown when the loudest voice belongs to a child who never spoke? The scholars who sift dust for answers leave shaken, because each layer of stone reveals not certainty, but deeper ambiguity. The cradle refuses closure, the Queen refuses peace, and the child, silent as ever, continues to reign, not as sovereign of a land, but as ruler of doubt itself. Centuries after the Queen's burial, the cradle still refuses to fade. History textbooks attempt to contain her within neat margins, dates, names, succession charts, but the public imagination refuses such cages. In villages near the ruins, parents still hush children with the phrase, "The stone crib is listening." To misbehave is to risk being taken by the Queen's ghost, a punishment feared more than the switch. Artists, too, could not leave the image alone. Medieval tapestries show a crowned woman bending over an empty cradle. Later, Renaissance painters reimagined her as Madonna and executioner in one frame, halo above her head, dagger hidden in her gown. Modern sculptors cast cradles of granite and steel, leaving them open in galleries, daring visitors to lean close and imagine what might once have filled them. Each interpretation wrestles with the same impossibility: how to honor a child that may never have lived and a mother who may have chosen death for it. Psychologists studying folklore call it a cultural haunting. The Queen's story, they argue, resonates because it exposes the most primal contradiction of motherhood. To protect a child, one must sometimes destroy. Families tell it as warning. Clerics preach it as lesson. Yet every retelling adds another layer of unease. Was she savior or murderer? Visionary or coward? The answer changes with the teller, but the unease never lifts. In modern times, the sight of her tomb has become pilgrimage and spectacle. Tourists photograph the stone recess, their flashes catching on smooth walls that reflect light like water. Some swear the hollow looks full when seen through a lens, though empty to the eye. Guides report visitors breaking down in tears, not knowing why. Children strangely approach the recess without fear, sometimes placing their hands inside as if greeting a playmate unseen. Scholars frown, cameras click, but the image spreads, a cradle of stone, touched by those who cannot resist it. The legend bleeds into politics too. When modern leaders face scandal, opponents invoke the Queen. Better a cradle of stone than lies in the palace. Protest banners depict the hollow as symbol of betrayal, endurance, or sacrifice, depending on who carries them. The Queen's silence has become a language anyone can borrow, though few agree on its translation. And then there are the private rituals. Archaeologists admit finding offerings even today. Tiny dolls carved from bone, locks of infant hair, letters folded into cracks of stone. Some are recent, paper crisp, ink unfaded. Mothers who lost children leave them as if the Queen still guards souls. Whether such acts honor or accuse her, none can say. But they prove one truth: her story remains alive, reshaped by grief that refuses to die. The media ensures it endures. Films dramatize her life as tragedy or horror. Documentaries weigh science against faith, then end with the same unanswered question. Novelists fictionalize her court as a theater of shadows, where every servant carries a blade. The Queen walks across centuries in many costumes, yet always carrying the same burden: the unborn ruler who lay in a cradle cut from stone. Perhaps this is why she unsettles us still, because the story is not just hers. It touches the quiet terror every parent knows: that life is fragile, that protection sometimes fails, that love may demand impossible choices. The Queen gave shape to that terror, carved it in stone, left it for future generations to inherit. And inherit it we have. In the end, the Queen's decision echoes not in palaces or battlefields, but in the minds of those who hear it. For she is not remembered as simply sovereign or conspirator, but as the woman who chose silence over revelation, stone over flesh, eternity over risk. And whether that choice was mercy or madness, it continues to whisper in every cradle rocked today: safety is never certain. The tale began in silence, and it must end there. A queen, a womb, a cradle of stone. She carried a secret through halls lined with daggers, and when death came, she chose to lock that secret in eternity rather than risk it in daylight. Centuries later, the stone still holds her choice, and we still struggle to name it. The discovery of the tomb was supposed to close the question. Science, after all, thrives on proof: residues, fabrics, fragments, data to be analyzed, cataloged, resolved. But instead of clarity, science gave us something older: ambiguity. Blood traces proved presence but not intent. Herbs proved intervention but not motive. And the cradle itself, perfect in shape and size, proved only that someone believed stone could guard what flesh could not. Ambiguity became inheritance. The Queen's silence survived the centuries intact. The world, though, cannot live without answers. That is why each generation remakes her: martyr, murderer, saint, conspirator. The unborn becomes whatever we most fear or most desire: a savior that never arrived, a threat that never matured, a ghost we cannot exorcise. And perhaps this is the truest meaning of her act: not to preserve one child, but to curse all children after with the weight of her decision. Look closer. The cradle endures not as relic, but as mirror. Parents peer into it and see the fear they cannot speak. Politicians see a weapon to brandish. Scholars see a puzzle to untangle. Pilgrims see a shrine. Children see a toy. And each is right, because the cradle was carved not only for the Queen's child, but for every gaze that would fall upon it afterward. It is less an object than a trap, one that captures meaning, bends it, reflects it back, never letting anyone escape untouched. And so we return to the first image: a woman swelling with life in a palace of enemies. She hides, she plots, she dies, and she leaves behind a hollow that history cannot fill. In the stillness of that recess, we are forced to confront a question that bites harder than any verdict. What would you choose if you knew a child's breath would summon knives? Would you let it live and risk its murder? Or would you bury it in stone, guarding its soul at the cost of its flesh? The queen answered. Her answer survives in mortar, iron, and silence. But we are left with the burden she tried to lift. That love and cruelty can wear the same mask. That mercy and murder can speak the same word. Her story is not about the past. It is about the present, every present. Because so long as humans fear for their children, her decision waits in the shadows, asking to be made again. Consider the wars where infants vanish before they can grow. Consider the families who hide their children's names, their faces, their voices, believing secrecy is the only shield. Consider the rulers who decide which lives are allowed to breathe and which must remain statistics. Each carries an echo of the queen's impossible choice. And each time the world claims it is unique, yet the cradle whispers otherwise. For the cradle is never empty. It holds not bones, not cloth, not proof, but a question. A question no one wants to answer aloud. When protection demands destruction, what kind of soul do we save, and what kind of soul do we lose? That is the queen's legacy, a silence carved into stone, a whisper that refuses to die, and it waits, patient as ever, for the next pair of trembling hands to choose stone over breath.